Our next speaker is incredibly talented at helping those who are inspired or passionate about something say and do what they want to do by expertly framing a message. Murray Bunton, CEO of Agency, a socially responsible advertising firm, has dedicated his career to helping social good organisations such as Oaktree, Amnesty International, World Vision, and my personal favourite, AYCC, the Australian Youth Climate Coalition, get into the digital age. Please welcome Murray to the stage.
Hey guys, how you doing? My name is Murray. Pleasure to be here. I run a small organization called Agency, and I guess in the context of telling you about communicating your purpose, I wanted to talk a little bit about ours. I want to talk about why communication matters and why saying it well matters. As we just heard, I run a small organization called Agency. We're a creative studio, and it doesn't feel that grand. It started out in this place. That's my mother's garage, where I bought a couple of IKEA desks and was determined to start a design business. A few problems with that. I bought 2 desks, and it was just me. I don't know what that was, like vision or something, but there you are. The other kind of fatal oversight at this point, not only had I never trained actually in design and was trying to sell myself as a designer, but also was a functional garage. It was actually operational at the time, and so halfway through a business call, my mom would be bringing the groceries home and parking the car next to my desk. So not a great carbon monoxide-filled environment to start a company, but hey, living the dream at age 21 at Mum's place. So we went from there to actually trying to get our first office and our first employee, and it was a really slow story. I certainly haven't had any kind of overnight amazing success, but 6 years later, it was 4 of us in the company, and we had some amazing clients. We were working for a number of great brands in design. But we had 3 which were particularly challenging for us. We had 3 companies which asked for work, whether that was work in design or branding or digital, and each of them caused a slightly different moral dilemma. Disney, a company which entertains people around the world, surely that's a great thing. But then, is that what we want to be doing? Pfizer, a company which makes drugs which saves lives every day, and yet litigious history and actually fighting for intellectual property laws, which makes it really difficult for people in the developing world to access medication at anywhere near an affordable price. Difficult. And then British American Tobacco, which we didn't have any hesitation in saying that's not something we want to support. But we're just designers, right? That's what we do. And we're not here to make moral judgments on the human beings who work in these companies. We're not here to actually have some kind of a crusade, surely, with every client we work with. And that was really difficult for us. We didn't know how to operate. We didn't know who we were. It was until we read the readings of a guy called Yunus. And that really prompted us with this thought that if we don't figure out who we are right now, if we don't figure out what we're all about, someone will for you. Now, that's true when you start a business. You inherit a model. It's true when you take on a client. You inherit the causes that they work for. And we're service providers, right? We're just designers. That's all we do. And so we really had to figure that out for ourselves. As I mentioned, we met Yunus. Yunus was is an incredible character. He, in the 1970s in Bangladesh, started the concept of microfinance. He started lending small amounts of money to people who made very little. Turns out, actually, that the poor who live in rural and urban Bangladesh happen to be better at repaying loans than what's called the subprime market. People didn't think they were very investable. People didn't think they were worthy of finance. And yet Yunus, an economist, walked outside of his university campus in a famine in the 1970s and decided to say, actually, why don't business services, why don't financial services extend to everyone? Why isn't that a basic right to get financed? Otherwise, these extortionate small loans grow. So he started something called a social business. And we were really compelled by this idea that actually there's a social problem. For them, it was actually getting people to lift themselves out of poverty through business. We do that through small loans. Actually, the bank itself could be a nonprofit. The bank itself could be organized around those goals. And he defines that as a social business. And I know you live in a world where there's a lot of commentary around social enterprise. And it's true, there's a lot of for-profit companies who do really good things in the world, but Yunus actually pushed us further to say, actually, what we're going to be about to the core is purpose, not profit. Now, we made that decision 4 years ago, and that changed everything for us, and I think it's a really important decision that people can make. I'm not saying necessarily that every business has to convert to one of these, but it's an incredibly fruitful thing we did. We actually grew 300% in our first year. We started to find our place in the world. We set out a set of values that we said we're working towards a world without poverty that champions human rights, with justice and social equality in a sustainable economy. 5 core principles that any project, I don't care who you are, whether you're a company, whether you're a big corporate or a charity, whatever side of politics you're on, if you're promoting those 5 values, we want to help work with you. And so that became agency, that became our mantra, and we grew. I now work with 19 of the best designers and creatives I know. It's a great team. It's great to be able to know that actually if you're doing something with purpose, that can actually be incredibly rewarding in the day-to-day. It doesn't fix everything in the boardroom, right? It doesn't fix the fact that work is still tough, like and deadlines are still real. But it means that every day you come to work feeling actually like you're contributing to some incredible causes. And we've been really privileged to be able to work with some amazing organizations. For us, these are the true heroes who campaign daily for a more just and a more equal world. And it's great to be a part of that. So I think the first thing I'd say to you, if you want to think about your why, I'd say define yourself or someone else will do it for you. I actually learned that in business. If you start a company, you inherit the standard business model, proprietary limited. You inherit the replaceable rules of a constitution, which defines a company whose intent is to maximize profits for shareholders. And you can choose to do that differently. The best piece of business advice I ever got was, differentiate or die. If you're just like everyone else, right? If you don't have any point of distinction, people won't remember you. And it's a really important point in communications. So I'd say define yourself, or someone else will for you. I think as we're talking today, I think that actually isn't as much business advice as it is communications advice. And I want to say it's not just important that we find our why, it's actually also important how we say it. I mean, that's what we do in communications work every day. But I want to give you a bit of a crash course, if I can, on just touch on a few things with regards to communication. So hopefully this is a little bit practical. First thing I want to talk about narrative frames. When we talk, when we speak, we use these big concepts and language which can really define an issue for us, right? We talk today, very much today, in Paris about climate change. 20 years ago, we were talking about global warming. That's an intentional shift. Global warming is true. The world is warming. This is on track this year to be the hottest year on record. The IPCC has documented that. 9 out of the last 10 years have been the hottest in our history, in our recorded history across millennia, and yet, it's climate change. We also see cold snaps. We see disrupted weather patterns, so it's easy to look around and think, well, it can't be global warming because it's really cold today. So no, it's climate change. And we then look around at our weather events, which aren't a scientific method of predictability, and we start saying, yes, actually, this is analogous to what I think the science is telling us. That's a simple change in words, but it's actually true in politics as well. I want to give you 2 examples from politics and then a few from the advocacy space. It's a bit of an exercise. I want you to think and fill in the blanks, if you will. I want you to find the one word which would complete this sentence. Julia blanked Kevin, Kevin blanked Julia. Think of that word in your mind, right? Who had knifed? Who had an aggressive word, right? Okay, a couple of us. Interesting. What about this? Tony blanked Malcolm, Malcolm blanked Tony. Think of that word in your head, and I want you to think, who had a word which is more passive, more peaceful, or maybe a little more salubrious, maybe a little more celebratory? Anyone have a more peaceful or passive word in their heads? All right. Probably a bit more than half of you in the room have a perception that this event was more calm or redeeming or different than that. The same thing happened in a cabinet room. A leader of a party was changed, and in cases they ousted a sitting prime minister, and yet our political narrative is highly different around these 2 events. Right? One was seen recently as a bit of a liberation with public opinion on their side, and yet the first one was always seen as a coup, right? A desperate attempt, and how could you? We framed politicians and their advisors and their media people, I guess, like me, except with a lot more experience and skill, have framed these issues in our public mind's eye. Those narrative frames are really powerful. It determines what we think about an issue at times. Let me talk to you through advocacy. Violence against women is a term which we hear a lot. We're hearing courageous campaigning attempts from Rosie Batty to try and break through in what is really a ridiculously difficult issue to get public motion on. It's great seeing some government action, but think about the words for a second. Violence against women. Charlie Pickering makes an incredible point. We've removed the actor from this. We've removed the perpetrator from this. We don't talk necessarily about violence against women and forget the fact that 95% of it or more is committed by who? Men. Men's violence against women. And there's a campaign to actually put the actor back into this. We are actually calling it by the name of the victim rather than the name of the person who's in the mix committing an atrocious act. We're working with some organizations who look at early learning, right? And when you think about early learning, of course, naturally in your mind, there's a lot of mental frameworks and narrative frames around early learning. How do we actually get the science out there, the truth that actually early learning is incredibly valuable for children developmentally, right? There's incredible benefits actually of learning, but we've got a problem with the name. It's early, it's too soon, it's almost not the right time to be learning. How could you do this to children unless we change the frame? What if we said bright and early learning? What if we changed the way we actually looked at that narrative? All of a sudden, bright and early connotates all of the right things that we want out of it, which matches up with the truth. It matches up with the science, right? We've got a framework here which needs to be overcome. Probably the biggest one we've been working on to date has been foreign aid. Now, we've got $11.4 billion from the forward estimates of foreign aid. We're the least generous now than we've ever been as a country. It's a difficult thing. So since our aid budget started in the 50s, we've cut horrendous amounts, and yet most people agreed. There's a problem with this phrase. And again, we've removed the actor. We've removed our place in it. We actually said, why don't we actually call it what it is? It's Australian aid. It's our efforts at believing in fairness. It's our efforts in believing that the world can be a more just and equitable place, and that everyone, not just people who live within our borders, but everyone in our region, our neighbors and our friends, deserves a fair go in life. And if it sounds a little preachy, you can go to australianaid.org and you can sign up for the campaign right now. That's a campaign combining charities across Australia who believe in international development to say, actually, we need to think differently about this. This isn't something we can cut with gusto. Second thing I want to say is once we've established a narrative frame, right? Once we know how we want to have the debate, right? Once we've conceded that, yes, this is how we want to talk about this issue, I think it's really, really important that you tell the truth. And that might sound a little duplicitous coming from someone who works in advertising, right? Don't all hate me, but it is really important that you tell the truth. I think you need to pick your values and say, these are the ones we stand for, and I simply won't communicate a message which I know is misleading, or that I know is completely purposeless. But I'd say telling the truth isn't enough. And I want to take you through a few ways that we've told the truth really badly. The first thing is a hesitancy, or worse, a silence. Martin Luther King has some really chilling words on this. In the end, the thing we remember is not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends. If we say nothing, surely the conversation continues without us. But the opposite of that, I think, is something we resort to a lot, is unthought communication, real confusion. The Gettysburg Address is only 2 minutes as a speech. One of the most memorable speeches in the entire history of American rhetoric. And yet someone spoke before Abraham Lincoln on that day for 2 hours. It was a great speech, incredibly complicated, going back, if you can read that on screen, to the Greeks and how this battle here was related to this heroic effort that happened back in Greek mythology, and yet nobody cared. It's tough, right? If you have the truth, you still need to communicate it well. What does it look like to communicate well? It looks like telling real stories, telling stories which actually typify that frame that we're talking about. It's being emotive with people. It's trying to connect on the basis of that human connection. But I think, take a step further than that, why are we telling stories? Because we're connecting to something that's deeply rooted in ourselves, our understanding of who we are as individuals, and also our understanding of us, who we are together. So if you want to connect people with a message, I think it's one thing to say, here are the facts. but it's much, much more compelling if you can find the stories which exemplify your frame and then communicate that message really well. So I'd like to say that it's not enough to tell the truth. Telling the truth is simply not enough. We live in a loud world. We live in a world where people will go on saying the things they say, and without challenge, nothing changes. Ai Weiwei, who just launched an exhibition yesterday, has this incredible tweet. He says, "The world is not changing unless we take the responsibility to change it." And I guess what I'd like to add to that, if I could footnote probably one of the greatest tweets from someone incredibly talented, if I could just add a little amends, is let's preach that truth as well. We hear in the world of communications that, let's not preach to the choir, and yet that's what happens on a Sunday every day at a church. It's what happens at a mosque every week when we rally the troops. We convert people to our cause. And I'd say there's a reason that people meet regularly. There's a reason why people who already are converted to religion get preached that religion every week, because we need to hear it again, and we need to hear it again. And if you think if you're a secular person who doesn't believe in the art of preaching, we could learn a lot, I think, from religious faith traditions over the centuries. If we believe in a message, if we believe in some form of truth, then let's not just tell the truth, let's preach it, or the conversation will go on without us. Thanks so much.